Joey, welcome to the Gymnastics Growth Show. Thank you for being here.
Oh, thank you for inviting me.
You're most welcome. Yeah, really good to meet you in person as well. And obviously we've done some work together, but it was all done remotely, wasn't it?
It was, yeah. So I feel like I know you and I watched the podcast, but this is the first time that we've met.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. And if you were to just give like a little snapshot of what it is that you do for the audience, for the listeners, because you got your fingers in lots of different pots, haven't you, really? And it's quite diverse, the work that you're doing, which is fantastic. So.
Yeah, a portfolio career,
nice.
shall we call it? So I currently chair the board for the national governing body for the sport of competitive cheerleading, Sport Cheer England, and that NGB is a relatively new startup in the sense it's only been going 4 or 5 years. So I am the chair, but I've also kind of taken on a CEO role in these kind of early years of that process of an NGB. I also have a consultancy that specialises in safeguarding specifically for cheerleading, dance and gymnastics, so performance sports where there's a lot of kind of physical contact in terms of either the activity or the coaching role that's performed. And that's like a real niche that I don't feel is addressed by lots of safeguarding services. So that's where I've kind of built that niche. And then I'm also the head of engagement for a dance company, for a hip hop dance theatre company based in central London. And my background is that I was a trained dancer. I was a professional dancer and dance practitioner. And then at the same time, I was also a competitive cheer athlete. And so those two worlds have kind of collided into a lot of what I do now.
Which is amazing. And they're all complementary, aren't they?
Yeah.
So you said a diverse portfolio, but actually they're all sitting within performance sport or performance activities. Which is really great. Now, we know each other, of course, from the second thing that you mentioned, which was your niche of safeguarding and welfare support. And I guess for the audience's benefit, you'd helped myself and Julie, on behalf of NR Gymnastics, put together what we feel is like a comprehensive handbook, which all our activities, be it our summer camps or our events, kind of fall under. And you were really invaluable for that because, again, we didn't know where to go in terms of getting that professional perspective, as opposed to just doing your courses, which we've done. Myself and Julie have done welfare courses and safeguarding courses. But it's the reassurance, isn't it, of having a professional look over that kind of content and go, yeah, this is good. This wording's too ambiguous, and maybe you've got massive gaps in your policies and your processes. So, yeah, you'd given us a lot of support with that, which was massive.
Oh, thank you. I mean, I think that the where I provide that help, or where we worked together well, was that I come from that lived experience of those sports as background. And I think that's the challenge often for someone going to a consultant or working with someone that doesn't have a background in gymnastics or cheer or dance, is that they don't really know what it is you're doing. And that was why I ended up working in this space, was when I was working as an education manager for dance companies or organisations or cheer gyms, where I was the designated safeguarding lead, I would be getting in service providers and they'd deliver the training. And my coaches would say to me afterwards, well, that was great, Joey, but they've just told us, like, we can't touch kids. So how am I meant to, like, spot a back tuck if I'm not allowed to touch them? Or how am I meant to do this or that? And I'd end up spending a good hour or so after they'd had their training with them going, okay, let's figure this out. How do we talk about consent? How do we talk about safe or supportive touch? How do we do all of these things? And I kept thinking, at some point, someone will write a course or deliver some training or do whatever it is that addresses these issues. And when they do, that'll be the person that I bring in. And it was around sort of 2020 when Athlete A came out on Netflix. That was a documentary about the abuse scandal in USA Gymnastics. That was really the rocket fuel up my backside to say, well, no one else is doing this work. Maybe I could do it.
You could be the person.
Maybe it could be me.
Yeah.
And so looking at what training I needed to then be able to go and deliver that. But I think it is really hard if you don't come from a gymnastics or a cheer or dance background to really understand what it is we do. And so I guess the two things complement them. All my various roles complement each other in that way, because I'll see something one of my roles at Sport Cheer England, for example, is that I am the direct report for the designated safeguarding lead in the safeguarding team. So I see the trends or the things that are coming in perhaps as reports. And I think, well, okay, that's interesting. That must be something that we need to address in our industry. Or, I'm quite on the ground, as it were, with the dance company I'm with, and they have a large academy of young people, and so I'll see the challenges that perhaps some of those young people are facing, and going, actually, that should be something that could be addressed within training. So there's also a kind of live element to what we do, which is what we should have, in terms of safeguarding and
data
risk
and
assessment and data and feedback and all of that kind of stuff. So, yeah.
And what do you see as the biggest amount of friction that organisations have with this? I mean, there's not many organisations that wouldn't agree that it's great to have policy, robust systems, safeguarding checks, all of that. But you know better than I do. I think there's probably a lot of clubs out there that you look at what they currently have in place and it's not fit for purpose in terms of like how important this topic is. So where is the friction for an organisation, do you think?
So I think there are 2 pinch points. The first one, you talked about a policy not being fit for purpose. So I think particularly if you're in gymnastics, you have and you are a member of a national governing body, you are mandated to have a safeguarding policy, but not all gymnastics clubs are affiliated, and also, talked about the different things like dance and cheer, then it may not be affiliated to anybody. Anybody can kind of set something up, can't they? And they may or may not have a policy. And if you're looking for somewhere to get one and you're going on the internet, it can be quite tick box. And some people have a policy, but they've never had to test it out. They've perhaps never read through it in its entirety. One of the things that I do when I support clubs and organisations in rewriting their policies, I often do like a secret shopper on their website, and I'll go and look and see what they have. And the amount of policies I've seen where you're reading through it and you'll see brackets, insert name of club here, and they haven't even bothered to like
it's copy and paste stuff.
It's just a copy and paste stuff. And I think the thing that I talk about a lot, there's I think maybe it's not here, I've been admiring your book collection. You've got James Clear's Atomic Habits somewhere on a bookshelf, and he says, we do not rise to the level of our goals, but we fall to the level of our systems. And we can say all these great things in our gym and even have like a good culture going on in the gym, but if something goes wrong, we'll fall to the level of the systems that we have in place. So it's about ensuring that they do work. But then I think if you've got the systems in place, it's ensuring that everybody within the organisation understands how those systems and what's in those policies play into the culture. So safeguarding and athlete welfare should be a living, breathing thing in your gym. And it should permeate and run through everything that you do. I often talk about it being, like the lens through which you should look at all decision making. And so, I think people fall into either a couple of camps. Either it's tick box, we've done it, put that on the shelf, or it's not even a tick box. But I think it's that compliance to culture piece that is really missing, because most clubs have one. I think often when something goes wrong, that's when they realise it's maybe not fit for purpose. And I think one of those things that I would encourage people to do is maybe sit down with your organisation, run through a few scenarios. If this happened, what would we do? And figuring out, does it work? Because it's in that moment that we will let a young person down. And especially if we've got that great culture and we say we do all these things, and then it hits the fan and we go, oh, okay, don't know what to do, quick, where's the policy? And it doesn't hold up. Because in those moments, that is not when you want to be making a decision about what is our policy, what is our process.
There's emotion involved.
In the emotion involved, you may be panicked, you may be in an emergency situation potentially, and you need to be relying on those systems to be really strong. What was interesting there, he said, we've let a young person down, and it really hits home how much of a duty we've got as coaches, but also, of course, club managers, leaders. It might be directors and trustees that actually are technically governing and in charge of an organisation, and they might not actually be putting enough thought into this. And you mentioned about how this permeates into all the decision making in the gym, and I think you're so right. There are so many scenarios. There's so much complexity that you do need to have crystal clear clarity, and I think that's what we ran through when we were putting together our handbook, because we found
with our camps, for example, we might do a 3-day camp in the summer, but there was quite a few unique scenarios to that where we don't actually employ the coaches that are on site. There's people travelling in and out, of course. Even the contractors that we had on site with us don't work for me. Technically, there were contractors there for a few days, and there was so many different unique scenarios where we had to think carefully about how do we ensure that everyone understands their responsibilities here. Of course, that we're accountable as an organisation, but how are we protecting people that we have such limited time with? But every club will have its own unique challenges as well, right? I mean, a lot of things are standard, of course. You know, if you come to a gymnastics club, you can have coaches, there's going to be spotting, there's equipment, there's all of the usual stuff, but there probably is some uniqueness to those organisations, which is why a copy and paste policy just isn't going to cut it.
And I think also people don't really necessarily think about how other topics might intersect with that safeguarding piece, that athlete welfare piece. One of the scenarios that we ran through was around catering, which no one would even think about as being an athlete welfare issue. But if you've got, someone with a serious medical condition, if they eat particular foods or allergies or whatever it is, and making sure that how things were prepared and all of that kind of stuff, if that suddenly becomes a serious medical emergency because you've not thought it through, and the decisions that you make around what is happening in front of you, that first aid medical emergency piece intersects quite heavily with safeguarding and with the athlete welfare. So it's thinking through all the scenarios and risk mitigating for them. We can't completely eliminate risk, and particularly in sports like gymnastics, there is an element of physical risk in what we're doing. We're not aiming to remove all of the risk, but we're aiming to mitigate and safeguard the young people in our care. And, predominantly we are working with young people. Obviously athletes can be adults as well, gymnasts are adults, and, it has a professional pathway, but the majority of coaches working in gymnastics are working with children. And so that has to be part of the business of what we do. I had somebody who fed back to me that they were talking about my book to a coach the other week. And the coach said, look, I didn't get into this to have to bother about all of that other stuff. I want to coach and I've got a designated safeguarding lead and I've got a policy. Why do I need to I shouldn't be having to give it this much thought. It's overburdening me with all of this other stuff. And I think that's the wrong way around to be looking at it. One, I'm sorry, if you're working with kids, it is your burden. that is something that you need to be managing. But there's also this really exciting dynamic that I talk about in the book that I wrote, which is around if we create that safe environment, that strong culture which promotes welfare, we're also going to see an escalation in elite performance. We're going to see better skill acquisition. We're going to see all of those things that come with psychological safety. So there's a huge performance benefit to creating that safe environment. But if you're working with kids, you need to take that responsibility and make that part of the piece.
Part of your job as a coach. Being a modern day gymnastics or cheer coach. And it's only going to increase, I think, moving forwards. I mean, this isn't going to slow down the importance of child welfare or safeguarding. It's only going to be more important, I think, in the future, for the right reasons. So, if people are behind now, they've got to catch up because they don't want to miss the train before it leaves the station.
And I think, especially if you have a small gymnastics club, but across all sizes of clubs, you've got these additional challenges that maybe you don't think about, like how you're promoting your club. So you'll be on Facebook, you'll be on TikTok, Instagram. How are you thinking about the safety of the young people in terms of how you're doing your branding, what images you're promoting, what video you're promoting, putting young people on the internet. There's loads of stuff to think about, which actually, again, if you go back to that lens of welfare, and think about it in that way, there's quite a lot to be thinking about. And you're right, we need to, maybe in one way it feels overwhelming, but in another way there's a really exciting opportunity for us to get it right and to do something fantastic in terms of the way that we're developing those young people, both as gymnasts and as humans.
Absolutely.
We're looking after humans and building the leaders of the future.
And there's a sense of reassurance, I think, and almost a sense of relief when you do get the stuff because I understand it kind of feels like you're standing at the bottom of a mountain looking up going, there is an overwhelming amount of stuff here. But in reality, I mean, there was 2 team members for us, so myself and Julie, and then of course the significant chunk of work that you'd helped us with there as well. And we actually managed to get through that in not a massive chunk of time. I mean, I can't remember exactly, you'd probably remember more, but I think within sort of 6 weeks, we'd done the bulk of that work. And now it's something that we just revisit periodically to say, like, is this up to date? Is there anything in here that we feel needs to change and evolve? And of course, it's an ever-changing landscape in terms of policy, regulation, and law. So, does that mean that, okay, every January we check? I mean, we get the updates, for example, with the I think it's the NSPCC. We get the weekly updates that Julie monitors as well. So we're pretty much on the pulse if things come to light, which is good. Yeah. But it does feel good knowing that you've got those systems in place, and as a team.
I know you love a system.
You do know I love a system.
You actually get a little name check in my book, because the first time we met, when you were scoping out whether we were going to work together, we nerded out about systems, because you were like, I've got this piece of tech that like tells me how I'm going to check all of my equipment. So we do all of our regular checks, and I was just like, oh my God, I love this. But I love a system, love a policy and a process, and I think people can think they're boring, but actually they're a structure which can really help. They're the scaffolding that you put around you that you so it doesn't feel so insurmountable. And you're right to kind of be regularly checking back, annually or more often if needed. So I'd say like the Casper email alerts that you get from the NSPCC, they're fantastic, because what they do is they will they break down any new, for example, legislation that's come out, how it might be relevant for you. So, for example, the position of trust change in law. So that obviously directly affects us in our sports. But also, if you have an incident that occurs that you've needed to manage in your club, to then go back once that's over and say, okay, was there anything that came up that we didn't have know what to do in, have a process for, or whatever it is. Okay, what do we need to do now? In the same way we do it with our risk assessment, because those two things really intersect. If someone fell off a piece of equipment because that equipment fell apart, you go, okay, well, what went wrong? Why did it fall apart? Was it because there wasn't a check done regularly on it? Was it because, X, Y, or Z? How do we fix that so it doesn't happen again? So that's what we're doing when we're reviewing, and there'll be lots of that will happen naturally, but actually putting it down into the document and making sure that we're prepared for next time. And there will always be something that that will happen that you've never expected, scenario wise, but it's all there to kind of to support and help you. Yeah.
And we've probably talked thinking about having like club policies, but ultimately, and we mentioned it as you came in today, like when you're traveling with teams, so you might be going to a competition. Like I go to Italy in the morning and then I'm straight to Luxembourg with the Canadian team, for example. And not all of the policies are going to be the same when you're overseas. In that case, they're going from Canada into Europe. There's all sorts of different scenarios, again, that have to be considered, that your typical standard club copy and paste kind of handbook, if that's what you've got from an NGP, might not kind of cater for. And again, it's reassuring to know that, okay, I know that if this happens, these are the systems that we can follow.
Yeah. And I think, again, like we talked about already, the risk assessment and your safeguarding policy really into play. So if you think about you're taking them into a sports arena, do you know when you get there where your emergency exits are? If you needed to have an evacuation and you needed to be able to move your gymnasts really quickly from that building for whatever reason, how are you doing your roll call? All of those kind of pieces. And we were talking just before we came in, I'm about to go out to the World Cheerleading Championships with Team England and a cohort of athletes and entourage of over 400. And we're thinking about things like, what do we do if we have a young person detained at the border? If they're under 18, that's a responsibility for us as a coach who's staying with them. If someone falls ill abroad, who's staying with that athlete? If it extends beyond the period of your trip and stuff, and that is a athlete welfare issue as well as a risk issue. And I think in this kind of modern age, we need to be thinking more about things like, sadly, things like evacuation drills, making sure that we've got all the emergency contacts, things that I'm sure most people have in place.
But we shouldn't assume.
Because
not everyone does, yeah. But as much, it's as much about being organised, isn't it? So, you know, do you have that access to that information exactly when you need it? You know, and there's obviously GDPR. Not everyone in the US that might be listening to this would know what GDPR is or has to worry about it so much. But, you know, gone are the days where we can just have everything out on paper as well. You know, do you have the systems to be able to access the information in a safe way that protects the data and the athletes too? But yeah, there's lots to think about. So here at NR Gymnastics, we're once again super proud to be partnered with Little Stars Leotards, who've been a fantastic partner for us over the years. Not only do they provide exceptional service for their customers, but they're a great team for us to work with, and they provide us a lot of value too. It's no surprise that so many clubs here in the UK, but also overseas, are making the switch to Little Stars Leotards for their service, but also the quality of leotards and clothing that they provide to the community. So if you're interested in checking out why they're such a great team to work with, visit littlestarsleotards.co.uk. And thanks again, Little Stars, for being such a fantastic brand partner. Now, you've referenced your book on a couple of occasions. I've actually got a copy here.
Yay.
Cool. Squad Safe. What was the motivation behind writing this? And how's it been, like writing a book and launching a book, and the whole process?
Yeah, so the motivation for it, I mentioned that I'd written a course and I deliver live training, but I'm one person and I haven't trained a staff to go and deliver that course. And I was trying to think about what is a way that I could get information out to more people. But I also encountered a few really interesting conversations during the kind of promotion of my training, which was around clubs, particularly in countries that were more litigious than ours, who were concerned about, so say things like, oh, we'd really like to do safeguarding training, but we're really concerned that if we did it, it might look like we have a problem in our gym and we don't want, you know, it was almost like the reverse. Right. I was going, no, if you have the training, it will reassure parents that you take this seriously. Mm-hmm. But there was this real concern that like, we don't want to look like we're trying to retrospectively do something because there's been an issue. And I thought for those coaches, as a starting point, you may not book a course or do some training, but you might be prepared to pick up a book. And actually the book came about because I started writing, it was going to be a really dry PDF that I was maybe even going to give away for free, that was like how to write your safeguarding policy. Yeah. And under each heading, I started writing explainers for why that particular section was important. Like, why would you include X, Y, or Z? It's because of this, or it could be these scenarios. And it started to become a bit bigger. And then I started writing the introduction to it. And I realized, the introduction is more interesting. The introduction is about the piece that comes before that, because you're only going to download a free safeguarding policy, how to write a safeguarding policy, if you already care. Yeah. And actually what we need to do, you know, I talked about that move from compliance to culture, is we need a whole sort of paradigm mind shift on how we think about athlete welfare, what it encompasses. You know, I talk in the book, there's a whole section on female athlete health, you know, and that is an area of growing discourse around how are we training female athletes. But there's a real intersection around safeguarding and athlete welfare, because, okay, now I know about how menstrual cycles might affect my athlete, but how do I talk to them about that safely? Yep. You know, particularly if you're a male coach, that can be an uncomfortable space to be in. You want to be proactive and investing in your athletes, but you also don't want it to become feel unsafe for them. And also, obviously, there's a potential that somebody who shouldn't be working with young people could use that as an opportunity to be unsafe with them. So there's a huge range of topics that I wanted people to start thinking about more broadly in terms of safeguarding and welfare. And even, you know, I mentioned your book collection. There's loads of those books that I was reading, not just around safeguarding and welfare, but around leadership, around culture change, because if we're going to do this work, we're probably going to have to do some quite hard self-reflection as a gym, as a staff. Where do we fall short? What do we stand for? What are our missions, value and purpose? Because, our values are what should be leading and driving, and some of those values should be around centering the athlete. So it kind of covers it. I was thinking about writing a book. I was writing a PDF. I was reading all of this stuff about leadership and culture change, and really starting to research things like sports science, more sort of sports science and the impact on coaching. And I just started joining all these dots and getting really excited about it. And I was like, actually, I've written a book. It was kind of
much
how it
bigger
happened.
than just a PDF. So
Yeah, and much bigger than it does have at the back. There is a how to write your policy, and there's a checklist of other policies that intersect with your safeguarding policy, like your whistleblowing or your complaints policy. Because sometimes people make a safeguarding report which is actually a complaint. It's not a safeguarding matter. So how do we define these things? That's all at the back of the book. But actually, there's some really exciting kind of juicy culture pieces at the beginning. And I know I've written it specifically around cheerleading, but actually
there's a lot of crossover into gymnastics.
There's huge crossover. And the reason that I was specific, because a lot of people have said to me since, this is applicable to all sports. Why didn't you make it for cheer and dance? Or why didn't you make it for cheer, dance and gymnastics? Why did you focus this book just on cheer? And I think there's something unique about that particular sport and community where they are less likely to pick up a book from another sport. Yeah. I know that gymnasts will go, oh, cheer, that's a bit like gymnastics, I'll read that book. Whereas cheerleaders might be like, oh, well, we're not that, so that's not for us. And I think particularly in the sport of cheerleading, in a way that it hasn't with gymnastics, the sport has grown exponentially in terms of the skill sets. What you see on the floor is insane, but the sports science and the coaching discourse and continued professional development hasn't grown at the same rates. So it's trying to meet cheer coaches where they're at. But there's huge intersection. We know there's a lot of crossover with gymnastics. Huge.
And you had an exciting book launch as well.
Yes.
Quite recently, wasn't it? It would have been in the last sort of 6 weeks, would it? Or
it was February.
February, yeah, okay.
So
February, about 6 to 8 weeks ago.
Yeah.
And you had some great guests as well that were there, and so that would have been exciting, including was Kath Bishop was there as well,
Bishop
wasn't she?
There. I invited Kath. Kath and I had met a couple of times. I heard her speak. Actually, I saw her. I was invited to a legal chambers to hear her interview Casey Ann White about the White Review.
Yep.
And Kath was getting involved in doing some supporting work and consultancy with British Gymnastics around culture change. And I went up to her afterwards and I was like, oh, I should have brought my book for you to sign. Oh, I feel really like, in awe of you. You're so fantastic. And we kind of got chatting and we've continued to have kind of discourse since that happened. And I invited her to the book launch thinking, oh, she won't come. She's such a busy lady. And she said, oh, well, I might if I can. I'm on my way back from Italy from doing some presentations there. And I hadn't seen her arrive. And we were actually getting into I was interviewed by somebody up the front. We had a seated situation. And I quote Kath in the book. Right. And the interview was actually talking about, oh, you quote Kath Bishop. We were talking about, as Kath does, around how we redefine success. And when you have that win at all costs mentality, it quite often can lead to abuse because it'll do what you need to do to get the results type of thing. And as I was saying, well, in the book I talk about, and I looked across the audience and I spotted her at the back and I was like, and Kath is here. But it was a really special moment, actually. It felt really great to be supported by so many people from, a broad cross-section of the sports world, really, who have been championing what I've been doing. My relationships with those kind of individuals have all come about through networking around my role at Sportcheer England, really, because a big passion for me in that sport, which has been unregulated for the last 30 years in this country, comes from a passion around safeguarding, because I don't know, there's about 89,000 young people who compete in cheerleading
in the UK.
Wow. And I'm like, who's
who's
checking that they're being safely looked after? So, that governance piece is really important to me, motivated by we need to safeguard athletes.
Love that. And what would your advice be to maybe a club manager that's listening to this, someone at an organisational level that's actually feeling overwhelmed? What would your advice in terms of like the next action steps be to kind of break this down and to follow up on their duty to protect the athletes, but also just to make their organisation more efficient and more effective?
Yeah. I'd say the first thing is they are probably doing loads of really good things that they don't acknowledge. And they probably have some processes in place that they follow, but they might not be written down. Yeah. Really important to make sure that they've got the basics in place and that those are written documents that are widely available to everybody. So if something happens, we all know, and by we I mean the staff, the athlete, the parent, what the processes are, what steps we're going to take. Not to be hard on yourself. If you're there saying, okay, what can I do? You already have the right mentality. Yeah. And then to take baby steps to audit the different bits of your organisation, of your gym, and say, okay, how can we make this better? Because that's really what it is. I quite often do risk assessment for organisations. They're like, oh, risk assessment's really scary. And I'm like, no, it's not. It's literally just thinking about what are the things we do? What are the risks?
Yeah.
How do we mitigate the risk? And that's the same for safeguarding. But starting with that policy is a really good place, because the policy should be listing all the things that you do and then how you're going to manage them. And I say making sure that everyone knows, because I think there's this huge fear around what happens if I make a report. And that can be a huge barrier to somebody reporting a concern, is that fear of not understanding what will happen. Yep. So if everybody understands, if I make a report, these will be the next steps, it makes it nice and clear. And I think something that if you do feel like you have some of that stuff in place already and you're saying, well, what more could I do, would be to perhaps add an easy read version on your website, or even a flow chart. When I just talked about what happens next, if I make a report, who does it go to? Who makes that decision? What might be the choices that they make? Whether it's criminal, or whether a criminal case, or whether it's a case for social services, or might it be disciplinary? What are the decisions that designated safeguarding leader is making? So that it can be easy to. I worked with a fantastic dance organisation that work with adults with disabilities, and they had created their safeguarding policy, and they were creating an easy read one for those that had additional needs who may have found it too much to read. And we wrote this easy to read policy, and they went, actually, no, this is the policy everyone should have, really.
Easy to digest.
Because easy to digest version. Yeah. So I'd say starting from there would be the place to start. And
how do people get over the concern that they don't know what they don't know? So you almost don't know what you should have in your policy at times, because a lot of people will say, I'm a gymnastics coach, or like, I'm this, I'm that. Like, this is not my area of expertise, which is fair, because that is the case. How do people find out what they do need to have in there, aside from any NGB support, which I think is good, but sometimes might not go as far as fulfilling the unique needs of every club, as I mentioned before? Yeah,
well, there are some great organisations out there. Particularly the CPSU, which is the Child Protection in Sport Unit for the NSPCC, the Ancraft Trust, which is a systems support partner with Sport England, who deliver on adult safeguarding. I've got loads of free resources online. Yeah. There's lots that you can access at no cost, but there's also courses that can be accessed at cost, and lots of really interesting stuff to go and get involved in. Make it part of your CPD, make it part of your continued professional development to go and do some learning around those things. Buy the book.
Buy the book.
Buy the book.
Absolutely.
That's a good place to start. And sometimes, the other reason I wrote a book is it is overwhelming, but the book is chunked in such a way that you can go, okay, I'm going to read a little bit of a chapter about social media today, and then maybe breaking it down, reading about it, and then chatting about it with your staff and saying, what do we think about this? What do we think we should be doing, and what more could we do? And take it in little steps like that. But I do think there's this really exciting case to be had around making better gymnasts, making better athletes. Off the back of the last Olympics, there was a lot of discourse in the news, in the press, around athlete mental health, and particularly interesting hearing from athletes who who got on the podium and then gone, oh, what now? This moment had defined me. Now I'm here. What does it mean? And then for those that had experienced abuse in pursuit of that, or was it worth it? And a whole discussion coming off the back of that, spearheaded by people like Kath Bishop, around what is psychological safety? How do we define success? What does good culture look like in our gym? And how can the creation of a better culture improve the way that our athletes retain information, how they show up, how they can bring them their full selves. And I don't just mean mentally bring them their full selves, but physically bring their full selves into the space. Because if you're going for and you know this, but if I'm going to tuck backwards for the first time, there's a lot of trust involved. If I have fear of failure, if I feel like if I do it wrong or I fall on my backside, I'm going to get shouted at or shamed, I'm less likely to go full out on that skill. So I'm increasing my risk of injury, for one, unless I'm prepared to go full out. But I'm also maybe not going to acquire the skill. So there's this huge sort of bonus of creating this great environment. But also, who doesn't want to work in a great environment, right? I love walking into a gym where all of the staff are really positive and everyone feels safe. And I think that safe culture, it applies to us as coaches as well.
Definitely.
If I've got a coaching staff and I've got a coach who isn't 100% sure of how to coach a skill, but they're afraid to be vulnerable and ask somebody else, or say that they've got an issue and just go, well, I'll wing it. We're creating additional risk in that space. So it's also about psychological safety for us as a coaching staff. How do we feel safe in the space to be able to be our best selves as coaches? And I think that's really exciting, right?
Definitely, yeah. And coaching with conviction, because if you lack clarity, whether it's on your policies or coaching methodology, whatever that might be, not having conviction usually means that you lack confidence, and that does impact the way that you perform as well.
Yeah, and I have seen in coaches, when I've gone into observed clubs, where you get coaches that seem to be emotionally unregulated, where they're aggressive and snappy, and the kids don't feel comfortable. Often that's them masking their inadequacy as a coach. Often that'll be because they aren't able to coach with conviction for some reason. Maybe they're not confident with the skill that they're coaching, or they've got an athlete in front of them that it's not the way that they're describing how to do or asking them to do what they're doing isn't landing. And they don't have anything else in their toolbox in terms of like, well, I don't have another way to teach you, so obviously you're the problem. And we don't want. It can't feel very comfortable as a coach to be like that either. It's not comfortable for the gymnast, but it's not comfortable for the coach. And so we want to create an environment where we can say, do you know what? I'm struggling to find another way to coach this skill with you, but I'm going to go find somebody who can maybe provide a fresh perspective. And in doing that, we're also teaching our young person what it looks like to ask for help, what it looks like to be vulnerable, what it looks like to say, I don't have all the answers. And that's a real skill as an athlete, and it's a life skill as well. And when we are working day in, day out with young people, and in gymnastics, you know, people are in the gym for tens of hours a week. Sometimes they see their coaches more than they see their parents. You know, we're in the business of raising young people, and I think those are really valuable skills.
I completely agree. And it's, you know, the more that you've spoken, the more it feels like this topic of safeguarding is not just about some of the more obvious things that we might think about with athlete welfare, but there are so many different areas that fall under that umbrella term, and that's why it's important that we don't bury our heads in the sand and actually we explore it. And it is quite uncomfortable at times to look into some of the scenarios, of course, the circumstances, to do introspective work, but the value that will bring back to the organisation and the whether it's from a safety or a performance perspective, I think is massive. So it's definitely worthwhile work. Squad Safe, where can people get hold of this? Is it on Amazon?
It's available at all good bookshops.
There we go. Okay.
Yeah, it's not self-published, so you can get it at like a Waterstones or a Foyles or wherever you want to go. But it is available on Amazon, and on Amazon it's sort of available in Kindle edition as well. So if you're an electronic reader rather than I haven't yet lent my voice to an audiobook.
Maybe in the future.
Maybe in the future, but it is available in lots of places.
That's great. So it's Squad Safe, a practical guide to athlete welfare in culture change in cheerleading, by Joanna Gamper Cuthbert, for those that are interested. And I definitely would recommend that people pick that up. And it looks very readable as well.
Yeah,
thanks for that.
Yeah, they did. The editor did a great job of chunking everything down, because I kind of like vomited all of the information onto the page, and I knew it needed to be chunked up. But yes, it's chunked in a way in that you can pick up a little chapter and then discuss it with your staff.
Yeah, I you know, if I was running an organisation, obviously me and Julie have both got copies of this. If I was running a gymnastics club, I would buy multiple copies, distribute them, and have it as an activity to get through. Like, read 10 pages. Next Monday, we're going to get together for half an hour, and we're going to talk about how those 10 pages have resonated with you, but also, you know, what are your thoughts on how that implies, you know, based on the organisation, and then just break it down like that and have meaningful conversations around the content, as opposed to just, you know, expecting people to read it cover to cover and not doing the explorative work, which I think is where it counts. So that's my advice to those that are listening. Do check this out. I'll provide a link, of course, to those who come across this content on social. But Joey, thank you. I really appreciate your expertise, your time in travelling and spending some time with me today. I'm inspired by how passionate you are about this. Like, your face is lit up and your energy is just always high when you've talked about the opportunities that clubs have. And I can see why you've been motivated to do work in this space. It means a lot to you. So thanks for everything that you're doing. I'm looking forward to our continued collaboration and helping NR Gymnastics to improve what we do as well. But yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of the Gymnastics Growth Show. Now, if you're an ambitious gymnastics coach with a hunger for self-improvement, check out my Gymnastics Growth Academy, where you'll find members from over 40 countries, all accessing my masterclasses, courses, templates, live community calls, exercise libraries, and so much more. It's a program that members have described as life-changing. So why don't you check it out for yourself? Head to gymnasticsgrowth.com to learn more. See you on the inside.